This year, Robert De Niro, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, and I will all turn 80 years old. Whenever we get together, the four of us use the pronouns we and us, and when we're apart, we use he and him, except for Paul, who wants sir every once in a while. Those other three couldn't make it this morning. One of the realities of aging is that many of us grow shorter, and I'm no exception. I'm now well below 7 feet tall. In addition, my gray-white hair is no longer receding. It's in full retreat. This morning I'm wearing black summer shorts, white polo, and sandals. I wrote and delivered this morning's message, about 12 years ago. If you were present then, I hope you've forgotten the following and can enjoy it all over again. Jenny's kiss. Home. There's something mythical and magical in the word. Its pronunciation is surprisingly close to the Buddhist meditation centering syllable Om. How many times have we seen a framed rendition of the words home sweet home featured in movies, photos, and such? Every red-blooded American can recite for you what Dorothy says when she clicks her ruby heels together and longs to return to Kansas. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. We somehow know that Dorothy and the good witch Glinda are right about that, don't we? Other authors have given us such lines as anywhere I hang my hat is home, and home is where the heart is. And in America's sport of baseball, the sport that ranks right up there with mom and apple pie, what is the greatest reward in the game? When you get to go home. And recently in the movie Finding Dory, we hear the line, and when you find your parents, then you're home. Certainly there are some less romantic ideas about home too. In Robert Frost's poem, The Death of the Hired Man, for instance, the husband mockingly says, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. His wife counters with, I should have called it something you somehow haven't to deserve. Thus we have the competing notions that home is similar to in-laws that you're supposed to like simply because you've been forced together by a marriage, and the opposite idea that you don't have to earn your place at home. It belongs to you simply by grace. No doubt there are many people who in their youth lived both sides of this dilemma. We desperately want to leave the nest, but then mom makes some chocolate chip cookies or dad gives us the key to the car. Perhaps the most famous story about the dilemma of leaving home and returning is the Bible parable of the prodigal son. In case you don't remember that story clearly, it involves a man who has two sons, and he decides to give each one half of his wealth. The one son then leaves home, lives a life of depravity, completely blows his half of the inheritance, and when he's living like a swine in the gutter, he decides to go back home. His father is so happy to have him back, he kills the fatted calf, invites everyone over to the house, and throws a party. The other son, the one who faithfully stayed at home and worked while his brother was off gallivanting around, is not too thrilled about the turn of events. What's going on, he asks Dad. I stayed here with you, worked hard, did everything you asked, and you give my brother all sorts of reward for being wayward and wasteful. Jesus explains the message of the parable by having the father, who is like God, tell his son, if a shepherd loses one of his sheep, he leaves the rest of the flock in the pen and goes to look for the lost one. When he gets it back, he rejoices. The other sheep had all his love and care the whole time. Why should they be upset if he gets the one lost sheep back? There's no appendix to the story to say whether the second son found the explanation sufficient. The term homecoming, on the other hand, is almost universally treated in a positive way. In his song, Perhaps Love, John Denver writes, "And in those times of trouble when you are most alone, the memory of love will bring you home." Another of Denver's songs pleads, "Country road, take me home to the place I belong." The idea of coming home has been a fervent wish for members of the military from the time Ulysses spent 10 years returning from the Trojan War to those in today's armed forces returning from the Middle East. And people in general associate our warmest and most family-oriented holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas, with coming home, because of course, there's no place like home for the holidays. Because several major holidays occur during the cold months here in the Northern Hemisphere, we also associate them with the warmth of a fireplace, mulled cider, chestnuts roasting, and so forth. Coming home is warm fuzzies. But this type of coming home is generally associated with the family and close friends. There are more public forms of the same notion. Schools, both public and private, at almost all levels have embraced homecoming celebrations throughout history. Alumni return to the site of their academic successes to see old friends, visit the buildings where they attended classes, greet past teachers and professors, crown a homecoming queen or king, and generally immerse themselves in a soggy pool of nostalgia. In the United States, these events have become almost synonymous with the football season. And one of the games is usually named the homecoming game, often against a perennial rival. But the celebration has become popular enough that now many schools also have a basketball-related social homecoming that is called a court warming. We know what it means to come home, but few of us can contemplate what it means to warm a court, basketball or otherwise, but I digress. I would like to examine with you a couple of other ideas related to coming home. But to begin with, we need to realize that there are other areas of life that can be considered homes, of a sort that do not fit those physical locations like the house we grew up in, or the school we attended, or even the state like West Virginia we feel a fondness for. These are the places where we feel a oneness with ourselves or others, places where we find unconditional love that is not dependent on location, status, or any of those qualities that are the accidents of birth, like race, sex, and nationality. Let me begin with a quote by Thomas Kelly from his book, A Testament of Devotion. Quote, "Deep within us all, there is an amazing inner sanctuary of the soul, a holy place, a divine center, a speaking voice to which we may continuously return. Eternity is at our hearts, pressing upon our time-torn lives, warming us with intimations of an astounding destiny, calling us home unto itself. Yielding to these persuasions, gladly committing ourselves to body and soul, utterly and completely, to the light within, is the beginning of true life." End quote. We're accustomed, as you use, to hearing about ourselves in terms of stardust and other natural elements, but Kelly isn't talking here about what we were before birth or what we will become upon death. He's talking about that inner individual spirit that is available to us whenever we want to retreat to our divine center, as he calls it, our holy place, home. I don't think he means a physical retreat at all, certainly not introversion or a depression. It is that inner space that is available through meditation or perhaps prayer, but it is not a conversation with a heavenly being. It is rather a contentment within oneself. It can follow moments of stress when we block out the talons of fear or disappointment or regret. that have recently gripped us. In times of danger or dread, we can pass into this sanctuary of the soul where we find reassurance in our own abilities and confidence in our strengths. In these moments, we come home to that place in ourselves where we can feel personal comfort and self-love. The wonderful black bass singer and actor Paul Robeson, the one who sang Old Man River in the musical Showboat, recorded the gospel song Going Home. The music for Going Home comes from Dvorak's New World Symphony. But a student of Dvorak's named William Arms Fisher added the words. Fisher said that the haunting music is the, quote, outpouring of Dvorak's own home longing, with something of the loneliness of far-off horizons, end quote. That this piece touches the human heart in general seems to indicate that there is something of an almost universal nature in this home longing that seeks solace in oneself. In the gospel tradition, the sense of the term going home has taken on the broader meaning of going to heaven following death, just as the term crossing the River Jordan has. And finally, there is that selfless act of unconditional love that tunnels into another's heart to create a love home of a shared understanding. Let me read you a poem by an English essayist, Leigh Hunt, to illustrate the point. It has been included in several volumes of the best loved poems, and when I first discovered it, it was called Rondo because of its rhyme scheme and its brevity. Often, however, it is given the title of its first line, Jenny Kissed Me. Jenny kissed me when we met, jumping from the chair she sat in. Time, you thief, who love to get sweets into your list, put that in. Say I'm weary, say I'm sad, say that health and wealth have missed me. Say I'm growing old, but add, Jenny kissed me. When I first read this poem, I thought the girl Jenny was simply an impulsive young thing who made a lasting impression on the narrator by leaping from her chair and meeting him with a kiss rather than the customary shaking of hands or verbal acknowledgement. As a college student at the time, I could imagine how I would feel if some girl greeted me in this manner on our first meeting, especially if she was cute. But what was it about this encounter that so impressed him that he recalls it in his old age as an experience worth putting on his list of important life events? Well, when I had the opportunity recently to take part in a survey to name a favorite poem and say why it is a favorite, I decided to revisit Jenny Kissed Me. Like the event in the poem itself had made some sort of lasting impression on me. This time I was able to Google the poem and its author to see if there were events to explain it. What I found amazed me. The author, James Henry Leigh Hunt, was born in England in 1784, but he wrote the poem in the mid-1800s. He was a good friend to another British writer, Thomas Carlyle, and to his wife, Jane Welsh Carlyle, nicknamed Jenny. A terrible epidemic of influenza struck England, and Hunt was seriously ill. In those days, flu was a dangerous disease with no preventative care that killed thousands and millions in Europe. And like AIDS in the early days of its epidemic, little was known about the cause of influenza or how it was spread. Hunt was just recovering when he went to visit the Carlyles. When he entered the living room, Jenny leaped from her chair, ignoring the dangers of contracting the disease from Hunt, and kissed him. Do you remember how fearful people were in the early days of HIV and AIDS? And how they feared shaking hands, kissing, or other contacts? Flu was treated the same way, but not by Jenny. Her act of selfless love touched Hunt deeply, and he wove the event into the poem. What Jenny did for Leigh Hunt was to form a little metaphorical home with him on the moment, and to wrap her unconditional love around him with a simple, heartfelt act. She showed him that he was more important to her than the fear of influenza. This homecoming with Jenny still warmed his heart years later, enough so that he chose to immortalize the event in his poem. A few years ago, there was a photograph and short item in the newspaper regarding a recent Ku Klux Klan march held in the mainly black section of a large U.S. city. The details of the march seem inconsequential now because of the event that occurred during the march. As the Klan members were proceeding down the street, some in their robes and some in civilian clothes, objects began flying at the marchers from the sidewalk crowd. One of the marchers was struck in the head and fell to the ground. A photographer snapped a photo just as a young black female stepped from the curb, knelt beside this hateful man, and shielded him with her body to protect him from further harm. I never saw a follow-up to the story, but the picture is emblazoned in my mind. This woman set aside her personal concerns for a few moments and made a home for this man. She gave him Jenny's kiss. Hopefully it inspired the man to write about the experience to preserve the metaphorical home he shared with the young woman there on the street. We too can give Jenny's kiss to people who need a home, people who are struggling through a moment or are lonely or are lost in any number of ways. Perhaps it can take the form of an encouragement to someone who's failing, or it could be a touch to someone who feels alone in the world. And this world of ours has so many people who are homeless in this way. People who feel isolated from humanity, from their family, from the country. We can be the people of peace if we will simply reach out to others and give them the kiss of kindness. I think Jenny would love that.